She no longer recognizes me. She needs care I cannot provide.
Please, I don't need this.
I don't believe you.
I don't believe you. Please, just believe me.
The records confirm a failed cognitive examination on October 14, 10 o'clock.
Oh my God. It's all right, sweetheart.
My husband stood before the judge and calmly told her I had Alzheimer's. Richard described me as confused, paranoid, and incapable of managing my own life. Behind him, our daughter Emily stared at the floor, already grieving the mother she believed she had lost. Then his attorney presented a medical report claiming I had failed a cognitive examination at 10 o'clock on October 14th. The moment I saw that date, my fear vanished. I remembered exactly where I had been that morning, and hundreds of people had seen me there. Richard had built his case on my failing memory, but he had forgotten one thing he could never explain. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you trust your own memory if everyone you loved said it was wrong? Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. 6 months before my husband stood in a courtroom and tried to take control of my life, I still believed I had one of the safest marriages in Ohio. Richard and I had been married for 42 years. We had raised our daughter Emily in a modest brick house on the north side of Columbus, survived 2 layoffs, 3 surgeries, 1 flooded basement, and more family arguments than I could count. Through all of it, Richard had been the steady one. At least that was how I remembered him. He had spent most of his career managing insurance claims, a job that required patience, organization, and the ability to remain calm when everyone else was panicking. People trusted him immediately. He spoke slowly, listened without interrupting, and had a way of making concerns sound like wisdom. When Emily was a teenager and came home 2 hours late one night, I had been furious. Richard had put one hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's hear her explanation before we decide what happened." When my mother died, he handled the funeral arrangements because I could barely remember to eat. When I retired from my job as an elementary school librarian, he gave a speech about how I had spent 33 years helping children discover the world through books. I cried before he finished the first paragraph. That was the man I believed I had married. Retirement suited me better than I expected. I volunteered at the county library twice a week, reading to preschoolers and helping older patrons learn how to use electronic books. I tended the roses along our backyard fence and kept a small herb garden near the kitchen window. On Wednesdays, I had lunch with my neighbor Elaine Brooks, who had lived across the street for nearly 20 years. I was not a woman sitting alone in a dark house forgetting what day it was. I had a calendar full of appointments, friends who depended on me, and a grandson who still called when he needed help with an English essay. Yes, I occasionally misplaced my glasses. I sometimes walked into a room and forgot why I had gone there. Once I called the dishwasher the washing machine and laughed so hard at myself that Richard had to finish my sentence. Those things happened to everyone I knew. But Richard began treating each ordinary mistake like a warning bell. The first incident happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April. I had spent nearly 4 hours at the library, helping prepare for the spring book sale. By the time I left, my shoulders ached, my shoes were damp, and I was thinking about the soup I planned to make for dinner. I stepped into the parking lot and stopped. For several seconds, I could not remember where I had parked. The lot was crowded. Cars filled nearly every row, and the rain made everything look gray and unfamiliar. I stood beneath my umbrella, pressed the button on my key fob, and listened. A horn chirped 2 rows away. I laughed at myself, walked to the car, and drove home. I did not consider the incident important enough to mention, but one of the library volunteers had seen me searching and made a harmless joke when Richard arrived later that week. "Barbara nearly lost her car in our giant parking lot," she said. The lot held perhaps 40 vehicles. Richard smiled, but his expression changed the moment we were alone. "How long were you standing out there?" he asked. "I don't know. A minute. A minute or 10 minutes. 1 minute, Richard. Did you remember what kind of car you were looking for?" I stared at him. Of course I did. "Did you feel dizzy?" Number confused. I was tired. It was raining. I forgot which row I parked in. He nodded slowly, as if filing my answer away. "My Aunt Margaret had Alzheimer's," I reminded him. "I know what the disease looks like. Losing a car for 60 seconds is not Alzheimer's. I didn't say it was. But the next morning while I was pouring coffee, he asked me what day it was. I thought he was making conversation. Friday. And the date, April 17th. He glanced at the calendar. The 18th. I shrugged. Then it's the 18th. He did not shrug. He watched me the way a doctor might watch a patient struggling to remember her own name. 2 days later, he asked whether I remembered the name of the couple who had moved into the blue house at the end of the street. I haven't met them yet, I said. You spoke to the husband last week. I waved to a man near the mailbox. That doesn't mean he introduced himself. Richard sighed. It was not an angry sigh, it was worse than that. It was patient. For the next several weeks, he found reasons to test me. At breakfast, he asked what we had eaten for dinner the previous night. While driving, he asked whether I recognized the road to Emily's house. When the doorbell rang, he asked me to identify Elaine before he opened the door, though she had been my closest friend for almost 2 decades. At first I laughed, then I became irritated. Finally, I began to feel watched. Stop examining me, I told him one evening. We were sitting on the back porch listening to rain tap against the roof. Richard held a glass of iced tea while I sorted seed packets for my garden. I'm not examining you, he said. Yes, you are. You ask me questions you already know the answers to, then study my face. I'm worried, because I forgot where I parked, because your aunt had Alzheimer's. My aunt was 84 when she was diagnosed. I'm 67. That doesn't make you immune. There was tenderness in his voice. That tenderness made me feel guilty for being angry. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. I love you, Barbara. If something were happening, wouldn't you want us to catch it early us? That word softened me. I looked at the man who had stood beside me for more than 4 decades and told myself his questions came from fear, not suspicion. All right, I said. But no more surprise quizzes. He smiled. No more quizzes. For a few days, he kept his promise. Then my keys disappeared. I always placed them in a ceramic bowl beside the front door. It was a habit I had followed for years. But on a Monday morning when I was preparing to leave for the library, the bowl was empty. I checked my purse, my coat pockets, and the kitchen counter. Richard watched me from the doorway. Lost something, my keys. Where did you leave them in the bowl? They aren't there. I can see that. We searched for nearly 20 minutes. Richard checked the sofa cushions and the garage. I opened drawers, looked beneath newspapers, and even examined the bathroom counter. The longer I searched, the more anxious I became. Not because I believed I had Alzheimer's, because Richard's silence made me feel as though I were failing a test. You should call the library, he finally said. Tell them you can't come. I'm not canceling because of a misplaced key. It'll drive you. I did, and during the entire trip, he said almost nothing. That afternoon when I returned home, I searched again. I opened the drawer beneath the kitchen counter where I kept cloth napkins for holidays. Under a folded red napkin, I found my keys. I stood there for a long moment staring at them. I had no reason to open that drawer on an ordinary Monday. We had not used those napkins since Christmas. I could not imagine placing my keys there. Richard entered the kitchen behind me. You found them, he said. They were in the napkin drawer. He looked at the keys, then at me. Well, you must have put them there. I didn't. Who else would have? The question was simple. The answer should have been simple too. There were only 2 people living in that house. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to laugh or admit he had moved them by mistake. Instead, he gave me that same patient, sorrowful expression. And for the first time in 42 years, I wondered whether Richard was worried about my memory or whether he wanted me to become worried about it. After finding my keys beneath the Christmas napkins, I began paying closer attention to the small disturbances in our home. At first, I told myself I was being unfair to Richard. 42 years of marriage should have counted for more than one misplaced set of keys. Perhaps I had opened the drawer while distracted. Perhaps I had carried the keys into the kitchen and set them down without thinking. But once doubt enters a marriage, it changes the way you look at everything. The following Tuesday, I missed a dental appointment. I had scheduled it 6 months earlier and entered it into the calendar on my phone. I remembered checking the appointment the night before. It was set for 10:30 the next morning with an alert 30 minutes in advance. No alert appeared. At 11:15 the receptionist called to ask whether I was coming. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I must have mixed up the time." After hanging up, I opened my calendar. The appointment was gone. Not moved, not marked as cancelled, completely erased. Richard was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. "Did you change anything on my phone?" I asked. He lowered the paper. "Why would I do that?" "My dental appointment disappeared. Maybe you forgot to put it in. I checked it last night." He folded the newspaper carefully. "Barbara, you were certain you put your keys in the bowl too." The words landed harder than they should have. "That isn't an answer. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm only saying you may remember doing something you intended to do." I walked away before he could see how deeply the comment affected me. 2 days later, I opened the refrigerator and found our electric bill resting beside a carton of milk. I stared at the envelope for several seconds. Richard entered behind me and followed my gaze. "What is that doing in there?" he asked. "I don't know. You were sorting the mail yesterday. I put the bills on your desk. Apparently not all of them." His tone was gentle, but his face carried that familiar mixture of concern and sadness. I picked up the envelope. It was cold and slightly damp. "I didn't put this here." Richard did not argue. He simply reached for the bill and said, "Let me handle the mail from now on." That became his answer to everything. When I misplaced something, he took control of it. When I forgot something, he removed the responsibility from me. He said he was helping, but each act of help made my world a little smaller. The following Sunday, I arrived late for church for the first time in years. I woke, dressed, prepared breakfast, and left home believing it was 8:15. When I entered the sanctuary, the choir was already halfway through the opening hymn. Elaine, who sat near the back, moved her purse and made room for me. "You all right?" she whispered. "I thought I was early." After the service, I checked my wristwatch. It showed 9:10, exactly as it should. When I returned home, I looked at the digital clock beside my bed. It was 40 minutes slow. Richard leaned against the bedroom doorway while I pressed the buttons on the back. "This clock was correct last night," I said. "Maybe the power went out. None of the other clocks changed. Then you must have adjusted it accidentally. Why would I set the clock backward?" He shrugged. "Why would you put an electric bill in the refrigerator?" I turned toward him. Do you hear yourself? I hear a husband trying not to frighten his wife. You are frightening me." For the first time, something sharp passed through his expression. It vanished so quickly I almost doubted I had seen it. That afternoon, Emily called. She asked how I was feeling, but there was caution in her voice. "I'm fine," I told her. "Dad said you missed church this morning." I was late because the bedroom clock had been changed. There was a pause. "Changed by whom I don't know. Dad also told me about the bill in the refrigerator." My stomach tightened. "He told you that Hes worried. Your father is reporting every mistake I make as though I'm a child. He isn't reporting you. He's asking for help." With what another silence. With keeping an eye on things. I had spent my life caring for Emily. I had sat beside her through Fever's heartbreaks and the birth of her son. Now my own daughter was speaking to me as though I were standing near the edge of a cliff and could not see it. "I don't need anyone keeping an eye on me," I said. "I know. I'm just asking you not to get angry with Dad. This is hard for him too." After the call, I sat alone in the living room and understood what Richard was doing. Every incident belonged to him first. Before I could explain what had happened, he told Emily his version. In his version, there was no missing calendar, entry, altered clock, or impossible hiding place. There was only a confused wife and a devoted husband. That evening, I found an unused blue notebook in my desk. On the first page, I wrote the date. Then I listed everything that had happened: the parking lot, the keys, the canceled appointment, the electric bill, and the bedroom clock. I recorded where I had placed important items. I wrote down the time I went to bed and the appointments scheduled for the next day. It was not because I believed my memory was failing. It was because I needed something that could not be softened, reshaped, or retold by someone else. For nearly 2 weeks, the notebook gave me comfort. Then Richard found it. He stood in the kitchen, turning the pages while I prepared lunch. "What is this?" he asked. "My private notebook. You're keeping a record of your day." "Yes." He looked at me with pity. "Barbara, people with memory problems often begin writing down everything because they're afraid they won't remember. Organized people write things down too. You never needed this before. I never had a husband questioning every move I made before." His mouth tightened. Then he closed the notebook and placed it on the counter. "You should show this to a doctor." "I should show it to a lawyer," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Richard stared at me. For one long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled, not warmly. "Why would you need a lawyer? I don't know," I said. "Maybe I'm just confused." That Wednesday, Elaine came over while Richard was at the hardware store. We drank coffee on the back porch, and I told her everything. She did not interrupt. She did not ask me what day it was or whether I remembered her name. She simply listened. "You don't seem confused to me," she said. "I don't feel confused when he isn't here." Elaine reached across the table. "That matters." Richard returned before she left. The moment he saw us together, his smile became stiff. Later, he walked Elaine to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, but the window above the sink was open. "She has good days," I heard him say quietly. "That's what makes this so difficult. She can hide it when she concentrates." "She isn't hiding anything," Elaine replied. "You haven't seen what I've seen." After he closed the door, he found me standing beside the sink. "You told her I was pretending to be well. I said no such thing. I heard you." He looked towards the open window, then he smiled again. "You misunderstood." The next morning I opened my blue notebook. One page had been torn out. I counted backward and realized it was the page I had written 3 days earlier after receiving a strange telephone call from our bank. A woman had asked whether I had authorized a recent change involving our accounts. Before I could ask what change she meant, Richard had taken the phone from my hand and ended the call. I had written every word I could remember. Now that record was gone, and Richard was the only person who knew it existed. 3 days after discovering that someone had torn a page from my notebook, Richard announced that he had made an appointment with a neurologist. He did not ask whether I wanted one. He simply placed a folded appointment card beside my coffee cup. "Thursday," he said. 10 in the morning. Dr. Maya Patel has an excellent reputation." I looked at the card for several seconds. "I never agreed to this. You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid." He smiled gently. "That's exactly what someone in your position would say." The words settled over the kitchen like cold fog. For weeks I had been questioning my own memory. Now I found myself questioning something even more dangerous, whether I had any authority left over my own life. "I'll go," I finally said. Richard looked relieved. "Good. Whatever the results are, we'll face them together. Together." The word no longer comforted me. Instead, it sounded like a promise that I would never again be allowed to stand alone. Thursday arrived bright and unusually warm for late spring. The neurology clinic occupied the third floor of a modern medical building overlooking a small park. Families sat quietly in the waiting room. Some elderly couples held hands. Others stared silently at televisions mounted near the ceiling. For the first time since Richard had begun questioning my memory, I became genuinely nervous. Not because I believed I had Alzheimer's, because I wondered what would happen if the doctor believed him. Richard checked us in before I reached the reception desk. "My wife has been experiencing significant memory loss," he explained before the receptionist had even asked why we were there. "She'll tell the doctor everything," I interrupted. Richard squeezed my hand. "She gets embarrassed discussing it." The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile. I hated that smile. It was the same look strangers gave children who had scraped a knee. It said, "We understand." Except they understood nothing. A nurse eventually called my name. Inside the examination room, Dr. Maya Patel greeted us with a warm handshake. She appeared younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, with kind eyes that met mine before they met Richard's. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, "tell me what brings you here today." I had barely opened my mouth when Richard answered. "She has a family history of Alzheimer's." Dr. Patel looked back at me. "Mrs. Sullivan, My aunt developed Alzheimer's in her 80s, I said. Recently, I've misplaced a few things, but my husband believes it's becoming serious. Richard leaned forward. She forgets appointments. One appointment I corrected. She loses important objects. One set of keys. She becomes confused about time. One bedroom clock was wrong. She denies all of it. Dr. Patel raised one hand politely. I'd like to hear Mrs. Sullivan answer each question herself. For the first time in weeks, someone had stopped Richard from speaking for me. The relief almost made me cry. The doctor asked about my medical history, medications, sleep habits, exercise routine, and volunteer work. She asked what books I enjoyed reading. She asked about my retirement. She asked how I spent a typical week. Unlike Richard, she did not treat every answer like evidence. She simply listened. Then came several memory exercises. She asked me to remember 3 unrelated words. She had me draw a clock showing a specific time. She asked me to count backward by 7s. She asked about the current president, today's date, and the city where we lived. I answered carefully. Not perfectly. I paused once while subtracting numbers. I forgot one of the 3 words until she gave me a small hint. But overall, I felt surprisingly calm. When the testing ended, Dr. Patel smiled. You did quite well. Richard shifted in his chair. But she forgets everyday things. Dr. Patel nodded. So do many healthy people. She put our electric bill in the refrigerator. I've seen exhausted parents place car keys in freezers, the doctor replied. One unusual event doesn't establish dementia. Richard frowned. She missed a dental appointment. That happens. She couldn't find her car. Dr. Patel looked at me. How long? Perhaps a minute. The doctor made another note. Mrs. Sullivan, she said, have you noticed changes in your mood recently? I've been anxious. Why I hesitated? Because every word mattered now. Because I feel like I'm constantly being tested. Dr. Patel looked from me to Richard before writing something else. Have you been sleeping well? Not particularly. Any recent stress, my husband has become convinced something is wrong with my brain. Silence filled the room. Richard laughed awkwardly. You see, she doesn't understand that I'm trying to help. Dr. Patel closed the file for a moment. I understand your concern, Mr. Sullivan. Family members often notice changes before patients do. But today's evaluation does not allow me to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. Richard blinked. So she doesn't have it. I didn't say that either. She folded her hands. Memory changes have many possible causes. Stress, depression, poor sleep, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid disorders, medication effects, normal aging. Richard leaned forward. So what now? I'd like additional blood work. She turned another page. I'd also like more detailed cognitive testing over time. How long? Several appointments. Richard's disappointment was almost invisible. Almost. So there's no diagnosis today, number nothing. Not based on today's visit. She smiled reassuringly at me. I certainly don't think we should jump to conclusions. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. Someone with years of experience had just confirmed what I had been trying to tell everyone. There was no diagnosis, no certainty, no proof that I was losing my mind. As we left the office, I thanked Dr. Patel. She quietly handed me a folder. My office number is inside, she said. If anything changes, call me directly. Richard answered before I could. We will. The drive home felt strangely quiet. I watched trees pass outside the passenger window, expecting Richard to admit he had overreacted. Instead, he finally spoke. Well, at least the doctor caught it early. I turned toward him. She didn't diagnose anything. She said it could be early. She said it could be stress. She said we need more testing. She specifically said not to jump to conclusions. Richard tightened his hands around the steering wheel. You're focusing on the wrong part. No, I answered softly. I think you are. That evening, Emily called. Dad said the neurologist confirmed early Alzheimer's. For a moment, I couldn't speak. What? He said the doctor wants to begin monitoring it before it gets worse. I closed my eyes. Emily, that isn't what happened. But Dad sounded so upset. Your father left out half the conversation. He said the doctor believes you're in the beginning stages. She never said those words. Emily hesitated. Maybe that's how Dad understood it. No. I heard my own voice growing firmer. He understood exactly what she said. After we hung up, I walked into the kitchen. Richard was washing dishes. Why did you tell Emily I have Alzheimer's? He kept rinsing a plate. I didn't. She repeated your words. I told her the doctor suspects the beginning of memory decline. She said no such thing. She implied it. She explicitly said she couldn't diagnose me. He placed the plate into the drying rack. Barbara, denial is common. My heart sank. You're using the doctor's uncertainty as proof. You're refusing to accept reality. What reality? He dried his hands and faced me. The reality that I'm trying to protect you. There it was again. Protection. Everything he did now hid behind that word. Protecting me from driving. Protecting me from appointments. Protecting me from decisions. Protecting me from myself. The next morning, he placed several forms on the dining room table. What's this? Just some paperwork. I skimmed the first page. A durable financial power of attorney. If something ever happens, he explained calmly, I could pay bills for you. I already pay bills. It would just be a precaution. I don't need it. Not today. His voice remained gentle. But what if next year you do? I slid the papers back across the table. No. He smiled again. Not angrily. Patiently. Take your time. That evening after dinner, Richard prepared tea. He had always enjoyed making herbal blends from chamomile and mint grown in our garden. He placed the steaming cup in front of me. You've been under a lot of stress. I have. This will help you sleep. I thanked him and slowly drank while reading a novel. Within half an hour, my eyelids became unusually heavy, far heavier than normal. I barely remembered climbing the stairs. The last thing I recalled before falling asleep was Richard gently pulling the blanket over my shoulders. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache. My mouth felt dry. For several long moments, I couldn't remember whether I had gone upstairs on my own or whether Richard had helped me. That frightened me more than anything else had. Because until that morning, every missing memory had involved misplaced objects. Now, for the first time, a piece of an entire evening had disappeared. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps I had simply been exhausted. Perhaps the tea had relaxed me more than usual. Perhaps the headache the following morning came from dehydration. Those explanations were comforting because they required nothing from me except patience. The alternative that my own husband had somehow caused the blank space in my memory was too terrible to consider. So I chose patience, for exactly 3 days. On the fourth evening, Richard carried another steaming mug into the living room. Chamomile, he said with a smile. You haven't been sleeping well. I looked at the pale golden liquid. Normally, I loved the smell of fresh herbs from our garden. That night it smelled different. Not unpleasant, just heavier. Richard sat across from me, pretending to watch the evening news while glancing at me every few minutes. Drink it while it's hot. I lifted the cup to my lips. Then an idea came to me. I took one small sip, just enough for him to hear the spoon touch the side of the mug. Several minutes later, when Richard excused himself to answer a phone call in the den, I quietly stood up. My heart pounded harder than it had in years. I carried the mug into the kitchen, opened the pantry, and poured nearly all of the tea into an empty stainless steel travel bottle that I rarely used anymore. Then I rinsed the cup poured in fresh hot water from the kettle, dropped another chamomile bag inside, and carried it back to the living room. When Richard returned, I slowly drank the replacement tea. He seemed satisfied. Around 10 o'clock, he stretched his arms and smiled. You look sleepy. I am a little tired. Maybe head upstairs. I will in a few minutes. He watched me for another 15 minutes. I pretended to yawn twice. Eventually, he kissed the top of my head. Good night. After I heard our bedroom door close upstairs, I remained perfectly awake. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30, no dizziness, no heavy eyelids, no strange fog in my thoughts. At midnight, I was still reading the same novel with complete concentration. I closed the book and stared into the quiet room. The previous week I could barely remember climbing the stairs. Tonight I felt perfectly normal. A cold sensation traveled through my body. The difference wasn't me. It was the tea. The next morning I woke refreshed. No pounding headache, no dry mouth, no missing memories. Richard looked surprised when I entered the kitchen. "You seem energetic." I slept wonderfully. He stared at me for a fraction of a second. "That's good." He sounded disappointed. The thought horrified me. Surely I was imagining it. No husband would be disappointed that his wife had slept well, would he? Later that afternoon, Elaine came over carrying 2 blueberry muffins from a bakery downtown. She immediately stopped smiling. "You look better." "I feel better." Finally. Her answer caught me off guard. "What do you mean? For the last few weeks you've looked exhausted every afternoon." "I have. You've had dark circles under your eyes." She tilted her head. "I almost asked whether you were coming down with something." I looked toward the front window to make sure Richard wasn't pulling into the driveway. Then I quietly told her everything. The tea, the fake cup, the bottle hidden in the pantry. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her arms. "Do you still have it?" "The tea?" She nodded. "I never threw it away." "Good. You think I'm being paranoid?" "No." Her answer came immediately. "I think we should find out what's in it." I blinked. "You mean, have it tested?" "My nephew is a pharmacist. I don't want to accuse Richard of something insane." Elaine leaned forward. "Barbara." She almost never used my full name. "Either your husband is doing something to those drinks," she paused, "or he isn't. Testing it doesn't accuse anyone. It answers a question." I looked toward the pantry. The stainless steel bottle suddenly felt heavier than iron. "I'll think about it." She reached across the table. "No." She squeezed my hand. "You've spent months doubting yourself. Now it's time to start trusting yourself." Those words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, Richard prepared dinner. While we ate, he casually mentioned that Emily had called. "She thinks you should stop driving for a while." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Why?" "She's worried. Because of one parking lot, and the missed appointment, and the bedroom clock, and the bill." He listed each incident as though reading evidence in court. "I've driven safely for 50 years." "I know." "Then why would I stop?" He smiled sadly. "Sometimes we don't recognize our own limitations." There it was again. Not concern, authority, as though he had already decided which decisions belonged to me and which belonged to him. "I'll continue driving." "If that's what you want." The answer sounded harmless, yet somehow it felt like losing an argument. 2 days later, I drove to the grocery store. When I returned to the parking lot, my car wouldn't unlock. I pressed the key fob repeatedly. Nothing. A young employee walked over. "Battery dead." "I don't think so." He looked at the key. "The battery's missing." "What?" He opened the back of the remote. The small coin battery had been removed. I stared at the empty compartment. "I used this yesterday." He shrugged. "Somebody took it out." I drove home using the physical key. Richard was mowing the lawn. When I showed him the empty remote, he looked genuinely surprised. "That's strange. I didn't remove it." "I never said you did." "You were thinking it." "No," he sighed. "I was wondering whether it simply fell out." "It can't fall out." He picked up the tiny cover. "I suppose anything's possible." That evening he called Emily. I overheard only part of the conversation. "Yes." The car again. "I'm beginning to think she shouldn't be alone." I quietly stepped away before he noticed me. The following afternoon, my grandson Noah came by after school. At 15, he had grown taller than both his parents, but still hugged me every time he visited. He sat at the kitchen island eating chocolate chip cookies while finishing algebra homework. Richard was outside trimming hedges. Noah glanced toward the window. "Grandma?" "Yes." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is Grandpa mad at you?" The question surprised me. "No. He acts different." "Different how?" Noah shrugged, like he's always watching. Children often notice what adults ignore. What makes you say that? When I was here last weekend, he hesitated. You couldn't find your reading glasses. I remember. I saw Grandpa pick them up off the coffee table. My heartbeat stopped. What? He looked at them. And then, he walked into the kitchen. Noah frowned, trying to remember. Later you found them upstairs. I stared at him. You saw that? I thought maybe he was cleaning. He looked confused. Didn't he tell you? I forced myself to smile. I'm sure there was an explanation. But inside something cracked. Not because Noah had proved Richard moved my glasses. Because he had mentioned it so casually. As though it had never occurred to him that hiding someone's belongings could mean anything at all. After Noah left, I opened every cabinet in the kitchen until I found the travel bottle. The liquid inside remained untouched. The next morning, Elaine drove me across town to meet her nephew Daniel, a licensed pharmacist. I told him only that I was worried someone might have mixed medication into herbal tea by mistake. He examined the bottle without making promises. I can't perform official forensic testing. I understand. But I can tell you whether anything seems unusual. How long? A couple of days. As we walked back toward Elaine's car, I felt guilty. What if I had misunderstood everything? What if Richard truly believed I was becoming ill? What if this investigation destroyed a marriage because of my imagination? Elaine seemed to read my thoughts. You still don't believe yourself. I want to. Barbara. She stopped beside the car door. If nothing is wrong, you'll go home with peace. And if something is wrong, she looked directly into my eyes. Then your husband isn't trying to prove you're sick. He's trying to make you sick enough that everyone believes him. I wanted to reject the idea. I wanted to tell her she had watched too many crime shows. Instead, I realized I could no longer say with certainty that she was wrong. For 2 days I jumped every time the telephone rang. Part of me wanted Daniel Elaine's pharmacist nephew to call immediately and tell me the tea contained nothing more than chamomile and mint. I wanted him to laugh gently and explain that stress could make perfectly ordinary herbs seem suspicious. That answer would have saved my marriage. Instead, silence filled those 48 hours. Richard behaved almost perfectly. He opened doors for me. He offered to cook dinner. He asked whether I wanted to watch one of my favorite old movies. If someone had walked into our home during those 2 days, they would have seen a devoted husband caring for his wife. Only I noticed the small things. He continued asking where I had left my purse. He casually quizzed me about appointments. He reminded me what day it was even when I hadn't asked. Each question sounded harmless by itself. Together they formed a cage. On Friday afternoon, my cell phone rang while Richard was mowing the lawn. It was Daniel. I can't give you an official laboratory report, he said carefully. I understand. But I found something that doesn't belong in herbal tea. My fingers tightened around the phone. What? A sedating medication. I felt all the air leave my lungs. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without sending it to a forensic laboratory. He paused. It isn't something that should accidentally appear in homemade tea. My voice became almost a whisper. What kind of medication? It appears to be a prescription sedative. Would it explain why someone felt unusually sleepy? Yes. Confused. It could. Difficulty remembering events. It could contribute to that as well. I closed my eyes. Thank you. There is something else. His voice became even more serious. If someone is giving this medication to another person without their knowledge, he stopped. That is not simply unethical. It's dangerous. After hanging up, I remained sitting on the porch for nearly 15 minutes. The world looked exactly the same. Children rode bicycles. Birds landed on the fence. Cars passed the house. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet nothing in my life would ever be ordinary again, because now I knew one thing with certainty. I had not imagined those missing memories. Someone had helped create them. That evening I said nothing to Richard. I wanted to watch him, to see whether guilt ever appeared on his face. It never did. Instead, he asked whether I wanted tea. No, thank you. You've enjoyed it every evening. I'm trying to cut back before bed, he smiled. Whatever makes you comfortable. Comfort. Another word he had stolen. The following Monday brought something even stranger. When I collected the mail, I noticed an envelope from First National Community Bank. Richard was still at Community Bank. Richard was still at the grocery store. I opened it immediately. The letter referred to a home equity loan. For a full minute, I simply stared at the page. We had never discussed taking out such a loan. I read every line again. According to the letter, additional documentation was required before final processing. The amount exceeded $300,000. $300,000. My hands began to shake. I hurried upstairs to the filing cabinet where we kept financial records. The folder labeled Home Loan looked untouched. Inside, I found copies of paperwork I had never seen before. There was an application, property information, income verification. Then, the signature page. My name appeared at the bottom. Barbara Sullivan. Except, it wasn't my signature. At first glance, it looked convincing. The letters resembled mine. The flourish beneath the last name was similar. But I had signed thousands of library forms during my career. I knew my own handwriting better than almost anyone. The capital B leaned farther to the right. The second L in Sullivan curved differently. Someone had practiced my signature. Someone had come very close. But they hadn't become me. The front door opened downstairs. Richard was home. Without thinking, I slipped the documents back into the folder. I had barely closed the drawer when he entered the bedroom. Everything okay? Yes. You look pale. I've had a headache. He walked over and gently touched my forehead. Maybe you should rest. I searched his face. There was no panic, no fear that I had discovered anything. Only concern. Perfectly rehearsed concern. That night I waited until Richard fell asleep. Then I quietly carried the loan documents downstairs and photographed every page with my phone. I returned everything exactly where I had found it. The next morning I called the bank. After verifying my identity, the representative looked up the file. I see the application. I'd like information about it. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan. She hesitated. I can only discuss limited details because another authorized contact has requested to manage communications. Another authorized contact. Yes. Who? I'm looking. Several seconds passed. Your husband. I swallowed. When was that added? It appears he became the primary contact shortly after the application was submitted. I never approved that. I'm sorry. Her voice became uncertain. Our records indicate signed authorization. Signed. Again. I'd like copies of everything. I'm afraid those requests now need to go through the primary contact. My husband. Yes. I thanked her mechanically and ended the call. For several minutes, I simply sat staring at my silent phone. My own financial records had somehow been placed beyond my reach. That afternoon, Richard noticed I was unusually quiet. Everything all right? I received a letter from the bank. His eyes flickered for only an instant. What about a loan? Oh, he nodded casually. That. What do you mean that? I forgot to tell you. You forgot to tell me we borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars. It isn't finalized. Richard. I could barely control my voice. What loan? He sat across from me. It's just refinancing. That's not what the paperwork says. You looked through the files. Yes. You shouldn't upset yourself with complicated documents. I'm asking a simple question, he sighed. The interest rates were favorable. I never agreed. He looked genuinely puzzled. You signed the paperwork. I stared directly at him. No. You don't remember. I remember exactly. His expression softened. Oh, Barbara. He reached across the table. I pulled my hand away. You see, he spoke almost sadly. This is exactly what I've been trying to explain. You've forgotten. I did not sign those papers. You did. I know my own signature. Do you? Silence filled the room. Then he quietly added, "Or do you only think you do?" The sentence struck me harder than if he had shouted, because for one terrifying second, I questioned myself. What if months earlier I had signed something without reading carefully? What if the signature really was mine? What if stress had erased that memory? Richard watched every emotion cross my face. Hope, fear, confusion, self-doubt. It was as though he had expected each one. Finally, I stood. "I'm going for a walk." "I don't think that's a good idea." I wasn't asking permission. Outside, the cool evening air steadied me. I walked 3 blocks before realizing someone was calling my name. It was Elaine. She had been watering flowers in her front yard. One look at my face and she set the hose aside. "What happened?" I told her everything. The bank, the signature, Richard becoming the primary contact, the way he insisted I simply couldn't remember signing. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Barbara." "Yes." "Did your mother leave you the lake house in Marblehead before she passed away?" I nodded. "It belongs only to me." "Not jointly." "No." She folded her arms. "And approximately what is it worth now?" "I don't know. Maybe 600,000 or 700,000. Elaine looked toward my house across the street. Then she slowly said something that had never occurred to me. "I don't think Richard is trying to prove you're sick because of your checking account." She paused. "I think he's trying to prove you're legally incapable. Before he does something with the property he can't touch while you're mentally competent." The words settled into place like the final pieces of a puzzle. The missing keys, the altered clocks, the disappearing appointments, the sedatives, the fake concern, the financial paperwork, none of it had been random. For the first time, I stopped asking whether Richard believed I had Alzheimer's. Instead, I asked myself a far more frightening question. What was my husband planning to do once everyone else believed it too? After my conversation with Elaine, I stopped asking myself whether Richard loved me. Love was no longer the question. The question was how far he was willing to go. For the next week, I behaved exactly the way he expected. I accepted his concern with quiet smiles. I allowed him to remind me about appointments. When he asked if I remembered what we had eaten the night before, I answered without challenging the question. If he believed I was beginning to surrender, perhaps he would become careless. Instead, he became bolder. On Sunday afternoon, Emily called. "Mom," she said cheerfully, "how about dinner at our house on Friday? Noah has been asking to see you." "I'd love that. We'll make your favorite chicken pot pie." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Richard looked pleased after I ended the call. "Family time will be good." "For whom?" "For everyone." He spoke so confidently that I wondered whether he already knew exactly how the evening would unfold. Friday arrived warm and bright. Emily's home had always been filled with laughter. Family photographs covered the hallway. Noah's baseball trophies lined the shelves beside framed school pictures. Normally, walking through that front door made me feel welcome. That night, something felt different. Emily hugged me tightly. "You look tired." "I've had a busy week." She stepped back and studied my face. "Dad says you haven't been sleeping." Before I could answer, Richard placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She's trying, trying." As though remembering how to be myself had become a daily assignment. During dinner, everyone talked about ordinary things. Emily described a difficult project at work. Noah complained about algebra. Richard laughed at one of Noah's jokes. If a stranger had watched us, they would have seen an ordinary American family enjoying a Friday meal. Only I noticed that Richard answered questions meant for me whenever he had the opportunity. "Mom, are you still volunteering at the library?" Emily asked. "She decided to cut back," Richard answered. "I didn't." He smiled. "You told me you were thinking about it." "I said I might reduce one afternoon." Emily looked uncertain. "Oh." The conversation moved on. 10 minutes later, she asked, "Mom, are you still reading that mystery series?" "I just finished," Richard interrupted again. She couldn't remember the ending of the previous book. I turned toward him. "Yes, I could. You asked me twice who the killer was." I asked whether you'd read it. His expression remained calm. I must have misunderstood. Every interruption was small. Every correction sounded polite. But together they painted a picture. A wife becoming unreliable. A husband patiently translating reality for everyone else. After dinner, Emily cleared the table while I offered to help. You sit, Richard said. I can carry dishes. I've got it. I've carried dishes for 42 years. He laughed softly. And you'll carry plenty more. Then, almost too quietly for anyone else to notice, he added, I just don't want accidents. Accidents. Another word. Another reminder. Another seed planted in everyone else's mind. Later, while Emily prepared dessert, I stepped outside onto the back patio with Noah. The evening air felt cooler than the crowded kitchen. You okay, Grandma? I am. He looked unconvinced. Not really. Teenagers rarely hide what they think. I appreciated that about him. What makes you say that? He hesitated. Everybody keeps acting weird. How? Dad keeps asking Grandpa if you're okay. I know. And Grandpa keeps watching you. I smiled sadly. You notice a lot. He shrugged. I guess. Before I could answer, Emily called us inside. Dessert was homemade peach cobbler. Richard served each plate personally. When he placed mine in front of me, he smiled warmly. I made sure yours isn't too hot. I thanked him. Then something caught my attention. His own plate had a generous scoop of vanilla ice cream. Emily's did too. Noah's as well. Mine did not. It was a tiny difference, almost meaningless. Yet after everything that had happened, I noticed every detail. Halfway through dessert, Richard suddenly frowned. Barbara, what? Did you smell gas? Everyone looked up. No, Emily answered. Richard stood quickly. I think I do. He hurried toward the kitchen. Seconds later, he shouted, The stove! We all ran after him. One burner on the gas range was turned on without a flame. The room filled with the faint smell of natural gas. Richard immediately shut it off. Then he slowly turned toward me. You were making coffee earlier. Yes. You must have forgotten. I didn't use that burner. Emily's face turned pale. Mom, I used the electric kettle. Richard gently rubbed my shoulder. It's okay. No, it isn't okay. I stepped toward the stove. I never touched this knob. Richard sighed. You don't have to be embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. Accidents happen. I didn't do this. Emily looked from me to her father. Mom, I know what I did. Richard spoke softly. This is exactly why I've been worried. Something inside me broke. Not because of the burner, because I suddenly understood. No matter what I said, the story had already been written. The confused wife, the patient husband. There was no room left for my version. I want to go, I said quietly. The drive back felt endless. Neither of us spoke. After we arrived, Richard went upstairs. I remained in the dark kitchen staring at our own stove. Could I have somehow turned the wrong knob? No. I hadn't even used Emily's stove after dinner. I had made coffee hours earlier in her electric kettle. I knew that, didn't I? For one terrifying moment, the familiar doubt returned. Then the front doorbell rang. It was nearly 10:30. I opened the door. Noah stood on the porch with his bicycle. I told Mom I forgot my calculator. He looked over his shoulder before lowering his voice. I need to tell you something. What is it? When everybody was eating dessert, he swallowed. Grandpa walked into the kitchen first. So, I saw him. Saw what? He turned one of the stove knobs. I stared at him. What? I thought maybe he was checking dinner. His voice trembled. But then he walked back to the table. And a minute later, Noah looked frightened. He asked if anyone smelled gas. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Are you sure? He nodded immediately. I was getting another napkin. You actually saw his hand on the stove? Yes. Every word Elaine had spoken echoed in my mind. He's trying to make everyone believe him. Noah looked terrified. I don't want Grandpa to get mad. He won't know you told me. I don't think he meant to see me. I knelt in front of him. You did the right thing. He hugged me tightly. I'm scared. So am I. After Noah rode home, I locked every door and sat alone in the living room. For the first time, I wasn't simply afraid of losing my reputation. I was afraid of losing my freedom. Because if Richard could convince Emily that I had nearly filled her house with gas, how many more accidents would it take before everyone agreed I could no longer live on my own? The next morning, Richard announced his plans over breakfast. I've scheduled an appointment with an attorney. I looked up slowly. What for? He buttered his toast as though discussing the weather. I think it's time we explored emergency guardianship. The knife slipped from my fingers and landed on the plate. Guardianship. Only temporary. I don't need a guardian. You nearly caused an explosion. I didn't. He met my eyes calmly. Barbara. His voice carried the same practiced compassion that had fooled everyone else. Sometimes loving someone means making decisions they can no longer make for themselves. For the first time in 42 years, I realized my husband was no longer trying to persuade me. He was preparing to persuade a judge. I barely slept after Richard mentioned guardianship. The word echoed through my mind until sunrise. Guardianship. It sounded compassionate when spoken by someone who claimed to love you. But stripped of its gentle language, it meant something terrifying. Someone else would decide where I lived. Someone else would control my money. Someone else would determine whether my opinions mattered. And Richard intended to become that someone. By 8 o'clock the next morning, he had already left for what he called errands. I waited exactly 10 minutes before calling Elaine. I'm ready, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I left the house with only my purse, my blue notebook, and the folder containing photographs of the loan documents. For the first time in months, I didn't tell Richard where I was going. Elaine drove us directly to Dr. Maya Patel's office. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mrs. Sullivan, do you have an appointment? No. I know that's unusual. I took a slow breath. But I need to speak with Dr. Patel privately. The receptionist disappeared for several minutes before returning. She has 20 minutes between patients. She'll see you. As I walked toward the examination room, my hands were trembling. Not because I feared the doctor, because I feared what would happen if she didn't believe me. Dr. Patel greeted me warmly. I'm glad to see you again. Then she noticed Elaine. And you brought a friend. This is Elaine Brooks. Dr. Patel invited us both to sit. What can I help you with today? I looked directly into her eyes. I need to know exactly what you wrote after my evaluation. She seemed slightly surprised. My medical notes. Yes. My husband has been telling everyone that you diagnosed early Alzheimer's. The doctor's expression changed immediately. I most certainly did not. I know. But no one else believes me. She opened my electronic chart on the computer. I documented mild subjective memory concerns. She continued scrolling. I specifically wrote that your examination did not support a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. She turned the monitor so I could read it. There. The words were unmistakable. No objective evidence of dementia at this time. Recommend follow-up evaluation and routine laboratory studies. Additional testing advised before any diagnosis. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Dr. Patel looked concerned. Mrs. Sullivan, she folded her hands. Tell me why this is so important. So I told her everything. The missing keys, the altered clocks, the sedatives, the forged loan documents, the gas stove, Richard's plan to seek guardianship. She never interrupted. She simply listened. When I finished, the room remained silent for several moments. Finally, she asked one question. Are you currently taking any medications your husband prepares for you? I was. But I stopped drinking the evening tea. What happened after you stopped? I stopped waking up confused. She slowly nodded. Did you bring the information about the sedative? Elaine handed her Daniel's written observations. Dr. Patel read every line carefully. This isn't an official toxicology report. No. but it's enough to concern me. She opened another drawer. I'm going to examine you again. For nearly 40 minutes, she repeated many of the same cognitive tests I had completed weeks earlier. Again, I remembered the words. Again, I drew the clock correctly. Again, I answered questions about current events, language, attention, and memory. When we finished, she smiled. You are performing at essentially the same level as before. So nothing has gotten worse. I don't see evidence of rapid decline. She leaned back. Frankly, your performance is inconsistent with the picture you've described your husband presenting. I felt as though someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been suffocating me for months. I'm not losing my mind. No. She chose her words carefully. I cannot tell you that nothing medical is happening. But I absolutely can tell you this. I have never diagnosed you with Alzheimer's disease. And if someone tells others that I have, they are misrepresenting my medical opinion. Those words mattered more than she could possibly know. I asked another question. Would you write that down? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. I will document today's visit. She began typing. As of today's examination, Mrs. Barbara Sullivan remains fully oriented, demonstrates intact conversational abilities, and does not meet diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's disease based on current clinical findings. She printed the note. Then she signed it. I stared at the page. It was the first written document in months that reflected reality instead of Richard's version of it. Before leaving, Dr. Patel stopped me. There is something else. Yes. I'd like to review every medication currently in your home. I frowned. I don't take very many. Bring everything. Prescription bottles. Over-the-counter medicines. Vitamins. Everything. The next afternoon, Elaine helped me gather every bottle from the medicine cabinet while Richard attended a Rotary Club luncheon. There were blood pressure tablets, calcium supplements, a sleep aid I rarely used, multivitamins. Then at the very back of the cabinet behind an old bottle of cough syrup, I noticed a white prescription bottle I had never seen before. There was no pharmacy label, only a small sticker with dosage instructions. I picked it up carefully. Inside were several pale blue tablets. I've never taken these. Elaine looked at the bottle. Neither have I. We carried everything back to Dr. Patel's office. She examined each container carefully. When she reached the unmarked bottle, her expression hardened. Who gave you these? I don't know. I've never seen them before. She opened the cap and looked closely at one tablet. This appears consistent with a prescription sedative. The same type Daniel suspected. She immediately sealed the bottle in a medical evidence bag. I'm sending this for laboratory analysis. She looked directly at me. Mrs. Sullivan, I strongly advise that you do not consume any food, beverages, or medication prepared solely by your husband until we understand exactly what's happening. Hearing those words spoken by a physician sent a chill through my body. This was no longer just Elaine's suspicion, it was medical advice. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Patel handed me a business card. The name printed beneath it surprised me. Rebecca Lane, attorney at law. Elder rights and protective advocacy. Who's this? I asked. An attorney I've worked with before. Dr. Patel answered carefully. If what you've described is accurate, she paused. This is no longer only a medical issue. It may involve financial exploitation and possible coercive control. She met my eyes. I cannot accuse your husband of a crime. But I can tell you that you should understand your legal rights before he files anything involving guardianship. I slipped the card into my purse. I never imagined I'd need a lawyer against my own husband. No one ever does. Those words stayed with me during the drive home. When Elaine dropped me off, Richard's car was already in the driveway. My stomach tightened. He opened the front door before I reached it. There you are. His smile looked perfectly normal. Where have you been? Out. With Elaine. Yes. What did you do? We had lunch. He nodded slowly. Then his eyes drifted to my purse, for only an instant. But I saw it. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking for something. Paperwork, evidence, proof. That evening, while Richard showered upstairs, I carefully placed Dr. Patel's written evaluation inside the pocket of an old cookbook in the pantry. I hid photographs of the loan documents inside a photo album from our 25th anniversary. Then I tucked Rebecca Lane's business card inside my wallet. I had just finished when Richard walked into the kitchen. His gaze moved across the room, the pantry, the table, my purse. Finally, he smiled. "I've been looking for you." "I'm right here." He stepped closer. "I emptied your purse earlier." My heart stopped. "You... what?" "I was trying to help you organize it." I forced myself to remain calm. "I've carried my own purse for 40 years. "I know." His voice remained soft. "I was only helping." He slipped one hand into his jacket pocket. Then he pulled out a small white business card. My blood ran cold. It wasn't Rebecca's card. It was another one. One I hadn't even realized was missing. Richard looked at it for a moment before handing it to me. "A lawyer's advertisement." He smiled gently. "You aren't thinking about doing anything foolish, are you?" I looked down at the card. It wasn't the one I had hidden, which meant only one thing. Richard had already begun searching through my belongings, and he intended to keep searching until he found what he feared most: someone willing to believe me. I slept with my purse beside the bed that night, not because it contained money, because it contained the only business card that represented hope: Rebecca Lane. I checked my wallet 3 times before finally falling asleep. The next morning I woke before Richard for the first time in weeks. I quietly dressed, slipped out the front door, and drove to a small coffee shop nearly 20 minutes away before calling Rebecca's office. "Lane and Associates. My name is Barbara Sullivan." My voice trembled despite my best efforts. "I was given your name by Dr. Maya Patel." There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Sullivan, Ms. Lane has a cancellation this morning. Can you be here in 30 minutes? "I'll be there." Rebecca Lane was nothing like I had imagined. She wasn't intimidating or dramatic. She greeted me with a warm handshake, offered me coffee, and spent the first 5 minutes asking about my drive instead of my legal problem. Only after I had relaxed did she open a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything." So I did. I started with the parking lot, the missing keys, the erased dental appointment, the bedroom clock, the tea, the forged loan documents, the gas stove, the neurologist, the sedatives, Noah's statement. When I finished, Rebecca remained quiet for several moments. Finally, she asked a question I hadn't expected. "Has your husband filed for guardianship yet?" "I don't think so." "Good." "Why?" "Because once that petition is filed, events move very quickly." She folded her hands. "What you've described is something we unfortunately see more often than people realize." I looked up. "You mean older adults being convinced they're losing their mental capacity?" She nodded. "It happens. Sometimes for financial control. Sometimes because family members genuinely panic. And sometimes," she stopped, "because someone wants access to property." I swallowed. "Do you believe me?" "I believe your concerns deserve to be taken seriously." It wasn't an emotional answer. It was a lawyer's answer. Oddly enough, that made me trust her more. "What should I do?" "The first rule." She held up one finger. "Don't confront him with everything you know." "I already have." "Not anymore." She looked directly at me. "If he believes you're collecting evidence, he'll destroy evidence." I nodded slowly. "The second rule." She raised another finger. "Keep copies of everything somewhere outside your home." "I've hidden documents." "Move them." "He searches my belongings." "I suspected as much." She handed me a large envelope. "Leave copies with me. If anything happens to you." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I understood. For the next hour, we organized every document I had: photographs of the loan papers, Dr. Patel's written statement, Daniel's observations about the sedatives, notes from my blue notebook. Rebecca scanned every page. When we finished, she leaned back. "There is one thing missing." "What?" "Proof of his legal strategy." "You mean the guardianship papers?" "Exactly. If he files them, I want to see them immediately." I promised I would. Before leaving, Rebecca asked one final question. Mrs. Sullivan? Yes. Who else believes your husband? I thought for a moment. My daughter. Anyone else? Most people probably would. She nodded. Then understand something. She spoke gently. When manipulation lasts for months, people don't change their minds overnight. Don't expect your daughter to suddenly believe everything. Expect resistance. Those words proved true much sooner than either of us expected. That afternoon, I returned home to find Emily's SUV parked in the driveway. Richard and Emily were sitting at the kitchen table. Both stopped talking when I walked in. Emily stood immediately. Mom, what are you doing here? We wanted to talk. Richard pulled out a chair. Sit down. I remained standing. Emily looked exhausted. I've been worried. I know. I talked to Dad. I'm sure you did. She sighed. Mom, her voice cracked. Dad says you've started meeting with strangers because you think everyone's conspiring against you. I looked directly at Richard. His expression remained perfectly calm. I met with my doctor. And an attorney. Emily's face fell. You actually hired a lawyer. I consulted one. Why? Because your father intends to take away my legal rights. Richard immediately shook his head. No. I'm trying to protect you. Emily looked between us helplessly. Please stop. Neither of us did. He forged financial documents, I said. Richard calmly folded his hands. Barbara, you signed those papers. No. You've forgotten. Emily pressed her fingers against her forehead. Please. I can't do this. I opened my purse and removed Dr. Patel's written statement. Read this. Emily accepted the paper. Her eyes moved across the page. I watched confusion slowly replace certainty. It says, she looked up. She didn't diagnose Alzheimer's. Richard answered before I could. That's because she wanted additional testing. Emily looked back down. But it literally says, he interrupted smoothly. Doctors have to write things carefully. Emily frowned. I don't understand. Richard leaned toward her. Honey, you've seen your mother forget things. Yes. You've seen her become confused. Sometimes. You saw what happened with the stove. Emily nodded slowly. Then she looked back at me. Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore. Those words hurt more than anger would have. Because I realized Richard had succeeded. He hadn't convinced Emily I was sick. He had convinced her she could never be certain I wasn't. After she left, Richard closed the front door quietly. Then he turned toward me. You shouldn't have involved lawyers. You forced me to. I've spent months trying to help you. You've spent months lying. He smiled sadly. I wish you could hear yourself. I laughed. It surprised even me. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the sound someone makes after discovering there is nothing left to lose. You know what's interesting? I asked. What? You never tell me I'm wrong. You always tell me I forgot. For the first time, his smile disappeared. That tiny reaction told me I had touched something real. That evening after Richard went upstairs, I received a text from Noah. Grandma, can we talk? I called immediately. He whispered instead of speaking normally. Mom and Grandpa had another conversation. What about? They thought I was upstairs. My heart began to race. What did you hear? Grandpa said. He paused, trying to remember the exact words. Once the emergency petition is filed, the judge will have to act quickly. Emergency petition. Not someday. Not eventually. Soon. Anything else? He said the hospital incident should help. I frowned. What hospital incident? I don't know. He just said he needed one more example showing you weren't safe. After hanging up, I sat perfectly still. One more example. Richard wasn't finished. Everything that had happened before, the keys, the stove, the erased appointments, had only been preparation. He was still waiting for something. Or perhaps, he was planning something. The next morning I decided not to stay home. Rebecca had warned me not to be alone with uncertainty. I drove to the public library, intending to spend a few quiet hours reading. Around noon, my cell phone rang. The screen displayed Richard's name. I answered. Barbara. His voice sounded panicked. Where are you? At the library. I've been looking everywhere. I told you I was going out. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. There was silence. Then he spoke slowly. Barbara, I already reported you missing. Every muscle in my body went rigid. What? I thought you'd wandered off. I've been gone less than 3 hours. I was worried. In the background, I heard another voice, a man's voice, then a police radio. Richard hadn't just called me. He had already called the police. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. If officers arrived, believing they were searching for a confused woman with suspected Alzheimer's, everything I said from that moment forward would be filtered through Richard's story first. By the time I ended the call, 2 Columbus police officers were already walking through the front entrance of the library. The librarian at the circulation desk looked from them to me with obvious concern. One of the officers approached carefully. Mrs. Barbara Sullivan. Yes, I'm Officer Daniels. Your husband reported that you may be suffering from memory loss, and that you left home without telling anyone where you were going. I told him I was going out. He nodded politely. I understand. We just need to make sure you're safe. Safe. Richard had discovered the perfect word. No one questioned a husband trying to keep his wife safe. I'm perfectly all right, I said. I drove here to return some books and spend the afternoon reading. The second officer smiled kindly. We're not accusing you of anything, Mom. I know. But my husband is creating a picture that isn't true. They exchanged a brief glance. Officer Daniels asked, Would you mind showing us your driver's license? I handed it over immediately. He compared the photograph with my face. Can you tell me today's date? I answered without hesitation. The 23rd. And where are we? The Columbus Metropolitan Library, main branch. Who's the current governor of Ohio? I answered again. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Then Richard hurried through the entrance. He looked exactly like the worried husband everyone expected him to be. His shirt was untucked. His breathing was heavy. His eyes looked damp as though he had nearly been crying. Barbara. He wrapped his arms around me before I could step away. I was terrified. I remained perfectly still. I told you where I was going. You didn't. Yes, I did. He turned toward the officers. You see? His voice cracked convincingly. She honestly believes she told me. The officers looked uncomfortable. I could almost see their thoughts. 2 people. 2 completely different versions of the same event. How could strangers know whom to believe? Richard pulled several folded papers from his jacket. I hate doing this. He handed them to Officer Daniels. They're medical records. I immediately recognized Dr. Patel's name on one page. But this wasn't the statement she had written for me. It was the summary from my first visit. The portion recommending further evaluation had been highlighted. Richard had also highlighted the words, memory concerns. Nothing else. None of the sentences explaining that no diagnosis had been made. Officer Daniels returned the papers after only a brief glance. I understand your concern, sir. I'm just trying to keep my wife safe. Again. That word. Safe. I reached into my purse. I have another statement. I removed the note Dr. Patel had personally signed after my second visit. Officer Daniels read it much more carefully. This says she does not currently meet diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's disease. Richard immediately answered, That's after additional observation. No, I interrupted. She has never diagnosed me. Richard sighed. She becomes very defensive whenever anyone discusses her memory. The officer looked at me apologetically. Mrs. Sullivan, I don't think there's any reason for us to keep you here. I agree. But perhaps it would be best if someone stayed with you today. Richard placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I'll take her home. I wanted to refuse. Instead, I remembered Rebecca's advice. Do not fight every battle. Choose the ones that matter. I quietly nodded. All right. The drive home took nearly 30 minutes. Neither of us spoke. Richard kept both hands on the steering wheel. His face showed none of the panic he had displayed inside the library, only calm concentration. Finally, he broke the silence. You embarrassed yourself today. I embarrassed myself. You argued with police officers. I answered their questions. You're becoming suspicious of everyone. I turned toward him. No. I'm suspicious of one person. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled again. You'll thank me someday. For what? For refusing to give up on you. I looked out the window. For the first time, I realized that every conversation with Richard followed the same pattern. Whenever facts appeared, he ignored them. Whenever evidence appeared, he changed the subject. Whenever I questioned him, he questioned my memory instead. Logic no longer mattered. Only the story mattered. And he intended to repeat it until everyone believed it. That evening, Rebecca called. I heard from Dr. Patel. She contacted you. Yes, she was concerned after learning about the police incident. I sat down immediately. How I called her office after leaving the library. Rebecca paused. That was the right decision. I let out a slow breath. I feel like I'm disappearing. You're not. But you are dealing with someone who understands that repetition creates credibility. What do you mean? If enough people hear the same story often enough, they begin treating it as truth. That's exactly what's happening. Yes. And we're going to stop it. She asked me to describe everything that had happened at the library. When I mentioned the highlighted medical records, she became very quiet. Barbara, yes. Did Richard ever authorize another cognitive evaluation? Not that I know of. If he files an emergency guardianship petition? She hesitated. Hell almost certainly include additional medical evidence. What kind? A private cognitive assessment. I've never had one. That doesn't mean he won't claim you did. Her words sent another wave of fear through me. After we ended the call, I opened my blue notebook and wrote down every detail from the day, the officers' names, the exact time, everything Richard had said. Halfway through writing, I remembered something. Months earlier, after the strange phone call from the bank, I had written another detailed account, the page Richard had torn out. I closed my eyes. That missing page had never been about memory. It had been about money. The realization struck me with new force. Every important piece of evidence seemed to disappear only after it threatened Richard financially. Not emotionally, financially. The next morning, Elaine arrived carrying coffee. She listened while I described everything. When I finished, she reached into her purse. I have something. She handed me a printed email. It's from Daniel. I read it carefully. The laboratory had completed a preliminary examination of the tablets from the unmarked bottle. Although further testing was pending, they appeared consistent with a prescription sedative commonly used for anxiety or insomnia. Not medication Dr. Patel had ever prescribed. I folded the paper carefully. One more piece. Yes. But we still need the biggest one. The guardianship petition. Elaine nodded. Or proof of what he's hiding financially. That afternoon, I decided to organize old family papers while Richard attended a meeting at church. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Perhaps I simply needed to keep my hands busy. Inside a storage box filled with tax returns, I found an old appointment calendar from the previous autumn. I smiled faintly. I had almost thrown it away. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at October. Several dates were covered with handwritten notes. Library meetings, volunteer shifts, doctor appointments. Then my eyes settled on October 14th. Someone had written across the page in blue ink Centennial Celebration Library Foundation speech, 9:30 a.m. My heart skipped. The date felt strangely familiar, important, but I couldn't immediately remember why. I stared at the words for nearly a minute. There was something about October 14, something connected to everything Richard had built. I just couldn't see it yet. Not completely. As I closed the calendar, my phone buzzed. It was Noah. His message contained only one sentence. Grandma Mom says Grandpa has a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow morning. I looked again at the old calendar lying open on the table, then back at Noah's message. Richard was moving forward. Whatever he planned, it had entered its final stage. The next morning, I watched Richard straighten his tie in the hallway mirror. He looked exactly as he always had before an important meeting, calm, polished, impossible to read. "I'm meeting an old colleague," he said casually. "I'll probably be gone until lunch." I simply nodded. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I called Rebecca. "He met with a lawyer today." "I expected he would," she replied. "Can you come to my office immediately?" "I'll be there." When I arrived, Rebecca was already reviewing a stack of documents. "I made a few inquiries yesterday," she said. "What did you find?" She slid a folder toward me. "Richard hasn't filed the guardianship petition yet." Relief washed over me. "But," I looked up. "But what?" "He reserved a hearing date." My heart sank. He reserved it. Yes. Emergency guardianship petitions can be scheduled before all supporting documents are formally submitted. How soon? Rebecca looked down at her notes. 5 days. 5 days. After months of manipulation, everything was about to be decided in less than a week. "We're running out of time," I whispered. Rebecca nodded. "Which means we need to identify every piece of evidence he intends to rely upon." She pulled out a legal checklist. "So far, we know he has exaggerated Dr. Patel's evaluation." I nodded. "He has eyewitness accounts from Emily." "Yes." "He has the police welfare check." "Yes." "And almost certainly," she paused, "he has another medical report." I frowned. "I've never seen another doctor." "That doesn't necessarily mean your name isn't on another report." Those words unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Rebecca leaned forward. "Barbara, think carefully. Has Richard ever mentioned another physician?" I closed my eyes. For several seconds, nothing came. Then, there was a name. "What name?" "I don't remember." "Don't force it." "I heard him once on the phone. He said—" I rubbed my forehead. "Doctor." "No." "Professor." "No." The memory slipped away before I could catch it. Rebecca smiled reassuringly. "It'll come." "I hope so." Before I left, she reminded me of something important. "Continue behaving normally. If he believes you're preparing for court, he'll become more careful." "I understand." When I returned home that afternoon, Richard was already there. He appeared unusually cheerful. "Good news." "What kind of good news?" "I spoke with someone who specializes in situations like ours." The words immediately caught my attention. Situations like ours. Families facing memory disorders. "So you met someone? A consultant? What was his name?" Richard smiled. "I don't remember." It was the first time he had ever deliberately used those words against me. I looked at him quietly. "You've become cruel." "No. I've become realistic." That evening, Emily called. "Mom, can we meet tomorrow?" "Of course. Just us." "I'd like that." We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our homes. When I arrived the next morning, Emily was already waiting. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. She hugged me longer than usual. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You don't have to decide today." She looked down into her coffee. "Dad keeps showing me examples. The stove. The police. The appointments. The doctor." She shook her head. "But every time I talk to you, you seem like yourself." "I am myself." "I know." Tears filled her eyes. "I think you are." She took a folded packet of papers from her purse. "I wasn't supposed to show you these." I unfolded them slowly. The first page carried the title Petition for Emergency Guardianship. My breathing stopped. Richard had already prepared everything. Page after page described me as forgetful, confused, unable to manage finances, and increasingly dangerous to myself. There were photographs of the stove, copies of the police report, notes describing wandering behavior. Then I reached the final section. Attached medical evaluation. Signed Dr. Leonard Shaw. I stared at the signature. "I've never met this man." Emily frowned. "Dad said you had a private evaluation." "I never did." She looked genuinely shocked. He told me this doctor confirmed everything. I turned each page carefully. The report claimed I had undergone cognitive testing on October 14th. October 14. Again. The date from my old calendar. The date that had been bothering me for days. I stared at it. Something inside my mind shifted. October 14. Library Foundation. Speech. Centennial Celebration. Why did that matter so much? Emily interrupted my thoughts. Mom? I looked up. I never saw this doctor. She nodded slowly. I believe you. It was the first time she had ever said those words. Not completely, not confidently, but enough. When we finished lunch, Emily quietly handed me the entire copy. Dad thinks I left these at home. I'll print another copy before he notices. I hugged her tightly. Thank you. As soon as I reached Rebecca's office, she began reading the report. Within minutes, she stopped. This is interesting. What? The examination supposedly occurred on October 14th. Yes. She circled the date with her pen. At 10 o'clock in the morning. The room suddenly became silent. 10 o'clock. October 14. Without warning, the memory struck me with astonishing clarity. The stage, the applause, the yellow flowers, the blue banner hanging above the auditorium, children from 3 elementary schools singing, the county commissioner shaking my hand, my speech, my acceptance remarks, hundreds of people, television cameras. Everything returned at once. I stood up so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. I remember. Rebecca looked up. What? I know where I was. On October 14th. I wasn't in any doctor's office. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own voice. I was speaking at the Library Foundation's centennial celebration. Rebecca's eyes widened. Are you certain? I was the keynote speaker. There were hundreds of people. The event was live-streamed. I grabbed the old paper calendar from my purse. The handwritten note suddenly made perfect sense. Speech 9:30 a.m. I laughed through tears. Not because anything was funny, because after months of doubting my own mind, my memory had just handed me the answer. Rebecca stood immediately. We need proof. There has to be a recording. There is. I know there is. The library archives everything. She was already reaching for her phone. If that event was recorded, she looked directly into my eyes. Then your husband has a very serious problem, because according to Dr. Leonard Shaw's report, I had been sitting in a medical office at exactly 10 o'clock that morning. But I suddenly remembered something Richard had forgotten. At 10 o'clock on October 14th, I had been standing under bright stage lights, delivering a speech before an audience that could prove exactly where I was. Neither Rebecca nor I wasted another minute. She picked up her phone and called the executive director of the Columbus Library Foundation while I searched my memory for every detail of that October morning. I wore a navy blue dress, I said, pacing her office. There were yellow roses on the podium. The children's choir sang America the Beautiful before my speech. Rebecca held up one finger, asking me to wait while the call connected. Margaret, this is Rebecca Lane. A pause. Yes, I know it's short notice. I'm representing Barbara Sullivan. Another pause. I'm looking for archival video from the Library Foundation Centennial Celebration held on October 14th last year. Rebecca looked at me as Margaret spoke. Wonderful. Is it still available? She smiled for the first time that day. Excellent. When can we get a copy? She listened for another moment. Perfect. We'll be there in an hour. She hung up and turned toward me. They archived the entire live stream. I felt my knees weaken. The whole thing, every minute. She picked up her briefcase. Let's go. An hour later, we were sitting in a conference room at the Library Foundation. Margaret Ellis, the executive director, greeted me warmly. Barbara, it's wonderful to see you. Then she noticed the tension on my face. Is everything all right? Rebecca answered before I could. We're trying to verify Mrs. Sullivan's whereabouts on the morning of October 14th. Margaret looked confused. You were here all morning. Exactly. She led us to the media office where a technician opened the archived recording. The screen faded from black. The date appeared in the lower corner. October 14, 9:02 a.m. People filled the auditorium. Volunteers welcomed guests. Children practiced their songs. At 9:27, the camera turned toward the stage. There, I whispered. I'm sitting in the front row. Rebecca leaned closer. At 9:31, the Master of Ceremonies introduced me. Please welcome this year's Lifetime Service Award recipient, Barbara Sullivan. The audience applauded. I watched myself walk confidently across the stage. No hesitation, no confusion, no wandering, no signs of cognitive decline. At 9:36, I began speaking. For nearly 20 minutes, I addressed the audience without notes. I thanked former colleagues by name. I recalled events from 30 years earlier. I quoted passages from classic children's literature from memory. The audience laughed at the appropriate moments. Several times the camera zoomed in close enough to show my face clearly. Rebecca paused the video. The timestamp read 10:03:17 a.m. She slowly turned toward me. What time does Dr. Leonard Shaw's report claim your examination began? 10 o'clock. She nodded. So according to your husband's evidence, she pointed at the screen, you were simultaneously sitting in a doctor's office and standing on this stage. No one spoke. The technician quietly copied the video onto 2 flash drives. Margaret also printed the official event program. My name appeared as the keynote speaker from 9:30 until 10:20 a.m. Attendance exceeded 400 guests. The event had also been broadcast live on the Foundation's website. Rebecca carefully placed every document into her briefcase. This changes everything. Before we left, Margaret frowned. Barbara, why exactly do you need this? I looked at Rebecca. She nodded, so I told Margaret the truth. By the time I finished, she covered her mouth with one hand. Oh my God. I had no idea. She immediately offered to testify if necessary. I introduced you myself. I spoke with you before and after the ceremony. You never left that building. Rebecca thanked her. We may need exactly that. On the drive back, Rebecca remained unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. The video destroys one report. But I want to destroy the entire case. What do you mean? I want to know who Dr. Leonard Shaw is. Back at her office, she began making calls. Within 20 minutes, she found him. Or rather, she found his retirement records. Dr. Leonard Shaw had retired nearly 3 years earlier. He no longer maintained an active private practice. Rebecca requested a telephone conference. To my surprise, he agreed. The elderly physician appeared on the video call later that afternoon. He looked puzzled. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry, I said. We've never met. I was about to say the same thing. Rebecca held up the guardianship report. Doctor, is this your signature? He adjusted his glasses. After several seconds, he frowned. It resembles my signature. But it isn't mine. You are certain? Quite certain. He leaned closer to the screen. I haven't performed a private cognitive evaluation in years. Rebecca asked the next question carefully. Did you ever examine Barbara Sullivan? No. Have you ever heard her name before today? No. The room fell silent. Then Dr. Shaw said something none of us expected. I should probably tell you something else. Rebecca nodded. Please. Several months ago. He thought for a moment. Someone telephoned my former office, asking whether retired physicians ever released old evaluation templates. Rebecca immediately became alert. Who called? I don't remember. But my receptionist mentioned that the caller seemed unusually interested in formatting. Not medical advice. Just formatting. After ending the call, Rebecca slowly closed her notebook. This wasn't simply a misunderstanding. No. It was manufactured. I nodded. I know. She looked directly at me. No, Barbara. You don't. She laid every document across the conference table. Dr. Patel's reports, the laboratory findings, the forged loan paperwork, the fake cognitive evaluation, the Library Foundation video, the event program, Margaret's written statement. No competent attorney would accidentally file a report placing a patient in 2 locations at once. So why would Richard do it? Rebecca answered without hesitation. Because whoever prepared this report never expected anyone to check the date. I stared at the papers. All these months. Richard had depended on one assumption, that I would never trust my own memory enough to challenge his version of events. My memory had become his greatest weapon. And now, it had become mine. Just as we began organizing the evidence for court, Rebecca's assistant knocked on the office door. A courier just delivered these. She handed Rebecca a sealed envelope. The return address contained only one name, Richard Sullivan. Rebecca opened it carefully. Inside was a single legal document. She read the first page, then looked at me. He filed it. The emergency guardianship petition. She nodded. It was officially filed this afternoon. My hearing would take place in less than 48 hours. Richard had made his move. Now it was our turn. The emergency guardianship hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. For the first time in my life, I spent the night preparing for court instead of preparing for a family holiday, a birthday, or a school event. Rebecca spread every document across her conference table one last time. Richard has spent months building a story, she said. We're not going to defeat it with anger. She tapped the stack of evidence. We're going to defeat it with facts. I nodded. For months I had lived inside Richard's version of reality. Tomorrow reality itself would finally have a voice. Rebecca organized our exhibits into careful order. Exhibit 1. Dr. Patel's original medical records showing no diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Exhibit 2. The laboratory findings concerning the sedative. Exhibit 3. The forged home equity loan documents. Exhibit 4. The Library Foundation video and official event schedule. Exhibit 5. Dr. Leonard Shaw's sworn affidavit stating he had never evaluated me. Exhibit 6. Noah's written statement regarding the gas stove. Each piece alone raised questions. Together they formed a pattern: manipulation, control, financial abuse. The following morning I dressed more carefully than I had in months. I wore a navy blue suit, the same one I had worn when receiving my Lifetime Service Award at the Library Foundation. Not because it looked elegant, because it reminded me who I had been before Richard convinced me to doubt myself. Rebecca noticed immediately. Good choice. I wanted to remember who I am. You won't have any trouble remembering today. The courthouse hallway was already crowded when we arrived. Richard stood near the courtroom entrance with his attorney. Emily sat several feet away, nervously twisting a tissue between her fingers. When she saw me, she immediately stood. Mom. I hugged her. Whatever happened inside that courtroom, she was still my daughter. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't have to apologize today. You only have to tell the truth. She nodded. I will. Richard watched the exchange without saying a word. His confidence remained almost unsettling. He genuinely believed he was going to win. When the bailiff called the case, everyone entered. Judge Helen Morrison reviewed the file for several moments before looking toward Richard. Mr. Sullivan, his attorney stood. Your Honor, my client seeks emergency guardianship because his wife is no longer capable of safely managing her affairs. The attorney described my supposed decline. He mentioned the misplaced keys, the forgotten appointment, the police welfare check, the gas stove. Every incident sounded convincing when told one after another. Richard testified calmly. I love my wife. His voice trembled just enough to appear sincere. I've spent 42 years protecting her. I never imagined I'd have to protect her from herself. Several people in the courtroom looked sympathetic. Months earlier, I probably would have believed him too. Then Emily was called. She walked slowly to the witness stand. Her eyes never met mine. Ms. Carter, Richard's attorney asked gently, have you observed changes in your mother's memory? Emily hesitated. Yes. What kind of changes? She misplaced things. Missed appointments. Sometimes she seemed uncertain. Richard lowered his head sadly. His attorney continued. Did these events concern you? Yes. Rebecca did not object. She simply took notes. When Richard's attorney finished, Rebecca stood. Ms. Carter. Emily looked toward her. Who usually informed you about these incidents involving your mother? My father. Did you personally witness every event? No. The missing keys? No. The erased appointment? No. The altered bedroom clock? No. Rebecca walked slowly across the courtroom. So much of what you believed came from your father's descriptions. Emily swallowed. Yes. Rebecca nodded. Did your mother ever tell you a different version? She did. And at the time, Rebecca paused. You believed your father. Emily looked toward me. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. Rebecca spoke softly. Do you still? The courtroom became completely silent. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Then she answered, no. Richard looked up sharply. Emily took a deep breath. I believed Dad because he always sounded calm. But every time I actually spent time alone with Mom, she glanced toward me again. She was herself. Richard's attorney immediately objected. Speculation. Sustained, the judge replied. Rebecca nodded. No further questions. Next came Dr. Maya Patel. She explained my examinations carefully. Did you diagnose Mrs. Sullivan with Alzheimer's disease? No. Did you ever tell Mr. Sullivan that she had early Alzheimer's? No. Did your clinical findings support an emergency guardianship? No. Richard's attorney attempted to suggest that further testing had still been recommended. Certainly, Dr. Patel replied, further testing is common. It is not the same as a diagnosis. Her calm confidence quietly dismantled months of Richard's storytelling. Then Rebecca called Dr. Leonard Shaw by live video. The retired physician adjusted his glasses before answering questions. Doctor, did you evaluate Barbara Sullivan on October 14th? I did not. Is this your signature? It is not. Did you prepare the report attached to Mr. Sullivan's petition? No. Richard's attorney immediately objected again. Rebecca remained perfectly composed. Doctor, she displayed the report. Have you ever met Barbara Sullivan? No. The judge leaned forward. You are stating under oath that this evaluation is not yours. I am. The courtroom suddenly felt very different. Richard shifted uneasily for the first time. Then came the moment Rebecca had been saving. She requested permission to play the Library Foundation recording. The lights dimmed. The large courtroom monitor flickered to life. The timestamp appeared. October 14th, 9:58 a.m. I stood confidently at the podium. The timestamp continued. 10:00, 10:01, 10:02, 10:03. Still speaking, still answering questions, still standing before hundreds of witnesses. Rebecca paused the video exactly at 10:03. She turned toward the judge. The medical report submitted by Mr. Sullivan states that Mrs. Sullivan was undergoing cognitive testing beginning at 10 o'clock that same morning. She held up the report. She cannot simultaneously be in two locations. The judge removed her glasses. Mr. Sullivan. Richard's attorney stood. There may have been a clerical error, Rebecca immediately replied. Then perhaps counsel can explain why the examining physician denies ever seeing Mrs. Sullivan. Or why the physician denies writing the report. Or why the event was live-streamed before hundreds of witnesses. Silence. Rebecca wasn't finished. She placed another document before the judge. The forged loan documents. Then another. The laboratory report concerning unauthorized sedatives. Then another. Mrs. Sullivan's treating neurologist. Finally, she spoke the sentence Richard had feared for months. This is not a case about Alzheimer's disease. This is a case about creating the appearance of Alzheimer's disease. Richard's composure finally cracked. He stood abruptly. I was trying to save our family. His own attorney whispered for him to sit down. He ignored him. I lost money. The courtroom froze. Richard realized what he had said only after the words had escaped. Rebecca looked at him quietly. What money, Mr. Sullivan? He said nothing. You mentioned losing money. Still nothing. Rebecca lifted the forged loan application. Was that before or after you forged your wife's signature? Richard stared at the floor. No answer came. Because for the first time since this nightmare had begun, he had run out of explanations. The silence after Richard's words seemed to stretch forever. I lost money. No one moved. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a fraction of a second before continuing. Judge Morrison looked over the rim of her glasses. Mr. Sullivan, her voice was calm but unmistakably firm, please answer counsel's question. Richard remained standing. His attorney quietly tugged on his sleeve. Sit down. Richard ignored him. Rebecca took one careful step forward. You testified that every decision you made was motivated by concern for your wife's health. Yes. You also just admitted you lost money. Richard swallowed. I made some bad investments. What kind of investments? My attorney advises me not to answer. Rebecca smiled slightly. You've already answered. She lifted the forged loan application. Was this loan intended to recover those investment losses? Richard looked toward the judge. His attorney stood. Your Honor, these questions exceed the scope of today's guardianship hearing. Rebecca responded immediately. They go directly to motive. If Mr. Sullivan fabricated evidence of incapacity in order to gain control over Mrs. Sullivan's separate property motive is central. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. I agree. Mr. Sullivan will answer. Richard lowered his eyes. Several long seconds passed. Finally he spoke. I invested in a commercial real estate partnership. How much? Nearly all of our retirement savings. Emily gasped quietly behind him. I turned toward her. Her face had become completely white. Rebecca continued. What happened to the investment? It failed. You lost everything. Almost. So you sought additional funds. Richard said nothing. You forged your wife's signature on a home equity loan. Silence. You attempted to gain legal control over property she inherited from her mother. Still silence. And when she questioned the financial documents, Rebecca's voice became sharper. You began convincing everyone she had Alzheimer's disease. Richard's shoulders slumped. I didn't know what else to do. The words echoed through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, not because I was shocked, because hearing the truth spoken aloud hurt more than I had expected. 42 years, reduced to one sentence. I didn't know what else to do. Rebecca wasn't finished. You also placed sedatives into beverages prepared for Mrs. Sullivan. I never wanted to hurt her. Did you? I just needed her to sleep. So she would appear confused the following morning. Richard hesitated. His attorney whispered urgently again. This time Richard listened. He sat down without another word. Judge Morrison looked toward Rebecca. Anything further? One final witness, Your Honor. Noah Carter. The courtroom doors opened. My 15-year-old grandson walked nervously toward the witness stand. He looked so young. Too young to carry the weight adults had placed on him. Rebecca smiled reassuringly. Noah, do you understand the importance of telling the truth? Yes. Did you see your grandfather touch the stove at your parents' house? Yes. When? Right before he asked if anyone smelled gas. What exactly did you observe? He turned one of the knobs. Did your grandmother touch the stove? No. Richard's attorney immediately stood. The witness is a child. Rebecca nodded. I is also an eyewitness. Judge Morrison allowed the testimony. Noah continued quietly. I didn't understand why Grandpa did it. I thought maybe he forgot. Then, he looked toward me. Later, Grandma told me everyone thought she had left the gas on. Rebecca asked one final question. Why didn't you tell someone immediately? Noah's eyes filled with tears. Because Grandpa always told me Grandma was getting confused. I thought maybe I imagined it. The words struck me deeply. Richard hadn't only made me question my memory, he had made a child question his own. When Noah stepped down, the judge called a brief recess. Rebecca and I sat quietly in the hallway. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she smiled. It's over. I looked toward the courtroom doors. It doesn't feel over. It will. 15 minutes later, everyone returned. Judge Morrison began reading her decision. The evidence presented today overwhelmingly fails to support emergency guardianship. She paused. In fact, she looked directly at Richard. The evidence raises profound concerns regarding financial exploitation, possible document fraud, and coercive control directed toward Mrs. Sullivan. She officially denied the petition, then continued. I am ordering that no guardianship proceedings involving Mrs. Sullivan may proceed without independent neurological evaluation selected by the court. She also ordered copies of the hearing transcript forwarded to the county prosecutor and Adult Protective Services. Finally, she looked at me. Mrs. Sullivan, I stood. Based upon the evidence before this court, you retain full legal authority over your person and your property. No one said anything. I simply nodded. For months I had fought to hear those words. After the hearing ended, reporters waiting outside noticed the unusual number of attorneys and investigators leaving the courtroom. Rebecca politely declined every interview. This isn't entertainment. It's a family tragedy. As we walked toward the parking garage, Richard called my name. Barbara. I stopped. Rebecca remained beside me. Richard approached slowly. He suddenly looked much older. His shoulders sagged. The confidence that had carried him through months of deception had disappeared. I'm sorry. The words sounded genuine. Perhaps they were. I never wanted this. I looked at him for a long time. What exactly didn't you want? He struggled to answer. I didn't want you to know. There it was. Not, I didn't want to hurt you. Not, I shouldn't have lied. Only, I didn't want you to know. I realized then that he still didn't fully understand what he had taken from me. You stole more than money, Richard. He lowered his eyes. You made me afraid of my own mind. His face crumpled. I know. No. I shook my head. You know you got caught. That's different. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly asked, Is there any way we can fix this? I thought about 42 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, hospital waiting rooms, road trips, anniversaries, thousands of ordinary moments. Then I remembered standing in my own kitchen, wondering whether I had imagined placing my keys in the wrong drawer. I remembered apologizing for things I had never done. I remembered lying awake wondering whether I was disappearing. No. My answer was calm, not angry, not dramatic, simply true. You didn't destroy our marriage in a courtroom. You destroyed it the first time you looked into my eyes, and chose to make me doubt myself instead of telling me the truth. Richard began to cry. I didn't. There were no tears left. As he slowly walked away with his attorney, Emily came to stand beside me. I'm so sorry, Mom. I embraced her. We both believed someone we loved. She cried openly. I should have listened. You are listening now, she nodded. I'll spend the rest of my life making that right. For the first time in many months, I believed her. As Rebecca drove me home, she glanced over and smiled. You won. I looked out the window at the passing streets. No, I answered softly. I simply remembered the one thing he never expected me to remember, and that memory had given me back everything else. 6 months after the courtroom doors closed behind me, I stood on the porch of the little lake house my mother had left me. The sunrise spread across Lake Erie in quiet shades of gold and silver, and for the first time in what felt like years, silence no longer frightened me. It healed me. When I first moved into the house in Marblehead, every room carried memories of my mother. She had loved this place because it overlooked the water instead of a highway. She used to tell me that waves never hurried anyone, and people should learn from them. I finally understood what she meant. The legal process that followed the guardianship hearing moved slowly. The county prosecutor opened an investigation into the forged medical evaluation and the fraudulent loan documents. Adult Protective Services completed its own inquiry into the financial exploitation and the unauthorized use of sedatives. I attended interviews. I answered questions. I signed statements. Each meeting forced me to relive pieces of the worst year of my life. Yet every interview also gave me something back. Every truthful answer restored another piece of the confidence Richard had taken from me. Dr. Paddle continued monitoring my health over the following months. She ordered additional neurological testing, comprehensive blood work, and an extended cognitive assessment. When the final appointment ended, she smiled exactly as she had the day I first met her. "I've reviewed everything." I waited quietly. "There is no evidence that you have Alzheimer's disease." The words still brought tears to my eyes even though I already knew the answer. She continued, "You experienced stress-interrupted sleep and exposure to medication that could certainly have affected concentration. But your cognitive function remains stable." She leaned forward. "Barbara, forgetting where you left your glasses once in a while is part of being human. It is not proof that you've lost yourself." I laughed through my tears. I wish someone had told me that a year ago. I wish they had too. When I left her office, I sat in my car for nearly 15 minutes without starting the engine. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I wanted to enjoy something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Certainty. Emily visited almost every weekend. The first few visits were awkward. Trust once broken does not return simply because someone apologizes. She never asked me to forgive her. Instead, she showed up. She helped repaint the lake house. She organized old family photographs. She accompanied me to legal appointments when I asked. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch without speaking. Silence became easier between us. One Saturday afternoon, she looked toward the water and quietly asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Dad?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she nodded. "I don't think I have either." We both watched a sailboat cross the lake. Finally, I said something I had only recently begun to understand. "Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing." Emily looked at me. "I may eventually forgive him, but I will never again trust him with my life." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I understand." Richard wrote several letters during those months. Rebecca advised me not to respond immediately. Eventually, I read them. Every letter contained apologies. Some were sincere. Some explained the investment losses. Some described his shame. One sentence appeared in nearly every letter. "I never meant for it to go this far." Perhaps he believed that. Perhaps he truly intended only to solve one financial problem before another appeared. But manipulation grows. One lie demands another. One forged signature requires another forgery. One hidden secret requires another hidden secret. Eventually, the lies become larger than the people telling them. That was what happened to Richard. I never answered his letters. Instead, I filed for divorce. Signing those papers hurt far more than I expected. Not because I questioned my decision, because I mourned the man I thought I had married. 42 years deserved grief, even if they could not be saved. Noah came to visit often after school. One afternoon, he carried a cardboard box into the house. I brought something. Inside were old family photographs and several notebooks. My mom found these while cleaning. At the bottom of the box lay my little blue notebook, the one Richard had mocked, the one he said proved I was losing my memory. I smiled as I opened it. Between 2 pages rested a small folded note. I had forgotten placing it there. In my own handwriting were the words, "Trust facts more than fear." I laughed softly. Apparently, somewhere deep inside me, I had already known exactly what I would need. Noah watched me. "What does it say?" "It reminds me not to let someone else decide what is true." He smiled. "I like that." "So do I." Together we spent the afternoon scanning old family photographs onto his laptop. He taught me how to organize digital folders. I taught him how to preserve handwritten letters. Some traditions deserve to survive technology. Others deserve to disappear forever. Several months later, the Lake House Reading Circle held its first meeting. 8 women attended. Some had lost spouses. Some had survived financial abuse. One had escaped years of emotional manipulation by her adult son. We read books together, but mostly, we listened. No one interrupted. No one questioned another woman's memory simply because it differed from someone else's version. Those evenings became my favorite part of every month. One rainy afternoon, as I finished arranging chairs before the group arrived, I noticed something unusual. My reading glasses were missing. For a moment, I froze. Then I laughed. I checked the kitchen counter. Nothing. The living room. Nothing. Finally, I opened the pocket of the cardigan I had worn the previous evening. There they were. A year earlier, finding them there would have terrified me. I would have wondered whether I was disappearing, whether I could trust my own mind. Now I simply smiled. People misplace glasses. People forget names. People occasionally walk into a room and wonder why they went there. That is called living. It is not called losing yourself. On the anniversary of the Library Foundation ceremony, Margaret invited me back to speak again. As I stood behind the podium, I looked across another crowded auditorium. This time my speech was different. I didn't talk about books. I talked about truth. I told the audience that memory is precious, not because it is perfect, but because it belongs to us. No one has the right to rewrite another person's reality for their own convenience. When the applause ended, I stepped off the stage with a piece I hadn't believed possible a year earlier. Richard had tried to convince me that I couldn't trust my own mind. In the end, the one memory he overlooked became the one that exposed every lie he had built. And that memory gave me something far more valuable than victory. It gave me myself back. After everything I lived through, I learned that losing confidence in yourself can be far more painful than losing money, a home, or even a marriage. When someone you deeply love repeatedly tells you that your memories are wrong, your feelings are mistaken, or your judgment cannot be trusted, you slowly begin to surrender the one voice that should matter most, your own. That is why it is so important to remember that growing older does not mean your wisdom disappears. Forgetting a name, misplacing your glasses, or walking into a room and wondering why you went there happens to almost everyone. Those ordinary moments should never become an excuse for someone else to take away your dignity, your independence, or your right to make your own choices. I also learned that real love never demands blind obedience. Genuine love protects without controlling, supports without humiliating, and listens without rewriting another person's reality. If someone truly cares about you, they will help you find the truth, not create fear, so they can gain power over you. And if you ever find yourself questioning your own reality because of another person's constant manipulation, don't be afraid to seek a second opinion. Ask for help. Keep records and trust the facts. Speaking up is not betrayal. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe your own voice when everyone else is telling you to ignore it. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes one honest conversation at a time, one boundary at a time, one sunrise at a time. There may always be scars, but scars remind us that we survived something that once tried to break us. Never let anyone convince you that your value depends on how perfect your memory is. Your kindness, your experience, your courage, and your life story are worth far more than flawless recollection. As long as you continue choosing truth over fear, no one can truly erase who you are. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone made you doubt yourself only for the truth to come out later? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them because your stories matter too. And if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas with meaningful life lessons and powerful endings, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to keep sharing stories that remind us all to value truth, courage, and the quiet strength that lives